A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. I begin, as always, in the name of Allah, whose grace I seek in this and all other matters. And I want to give my profuse call of gratitude to Dr. Jerusha Lemti for meticulous preparations to get myself here and to be here. And also, I just have to say that there are two people on this panel that probably for the first time in my life I feel so embarrassed to speak in front of, because my love and admiration for their capacity to walk the walk is off the charts, and that's my sister Linda and my brother Omid. As I was thinking about what I was going to say, I just kept getting stuck at that place. I couldn't go any further because I'm really in awe and slightly embarrassed because I admire them so much. I want to tell you something in the little bit of time that I have about my background before I say just a comment or two about where I am now. I was raised by a Methodist minister who raised me with the God of love. And of course, I never lost that. And so when I became Muslim, I took the name Wadud, which is the attribute of God that means love, as a reflection of that. And my father took me to the March on Washington with the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King just before my 11th birthday. So in my mind, there's never been a separation between notions of the divine and notions of social justice. And eventually, I came my way to Islam. I made a stop in Buddhism for about a year. And unbeknownst to me, I was always on my way here. And when I got here, I knew that I was home. And within that, it has been necessary for me to try to define what I mean by Islam in such a way that I can live it. And I just want to say something about what that is so that you'll understand my perspective on social justice. I believe that everything in the creation responds to its creator, and that when we live in total peace and harmony, then there is no choice for us except to establish justice, to live by it, to promote it, and to have it shine from our heart. And that when we do that, we experience the greatest sense of at one-mit and peace with the Creator and being in the creation. So social justice is not something that you do, it's something that you try to be. And when you try to be it, then you have no choice but to make sure that it is spread in love and compassion to everyone else. So the particular issues that I have been engaged with have always been those issues where the experiences of everyday life have somehow separated people from the lived reality of that kind of peace. And it started with me working on issues of gender because of my scholarship in the area of Islamic sacred texts or in the Quran, and my promotion for the necessity for including a gender perspective on how we look at all of Islamic sacred sources. And eventually that led me to a place far away, actually literally on the other side of the map in Malaysia. And I became a part of an organization that was one of the first known organizations that used Islam as a motivation to struggle for social justice for women, called Sisters in Islam. And eventually the parameters of that organization, which is now a national organization more than 25 years old in Malaysia, spread to work that we were doing in other parts of the world, and a movement was launched in 2009 called Musawa. And Musawa literally means equality and reciprocity. And the objective of Musawa is to work for equality in Muslim personal status law. We are represented by about 50 countries with members who are working in their own context to be able to combat what are the particular needs that they have there, to feed that back to us. And we supply them with a kind of theological framework and a intense relationship with Islamic primary sources so that they feel empowered to go forward and they are not castigated by having someone tell them you can't do that in Islam, which is one of the favorite sentences that we all seem to encounter. And what's interesting is that as an African American Muslim by choice, the bulk of my work is actually not very well known in my own community. I would say, less than 1 in 10 in my community has read my books. Less than 1 in 10 actually know what Muslim personal status law is, because it's not something that we have to engage at the constitutional level the way other Muslim women do in their countries. In that respect, a lot of my work is unknown, but I have the pleasure of actually seeing the impact of the work that I do and network with women and men across the planet. And recently I became engaged with a project to promote the ideas of equality and human dignity to LGBTQI Muslims. And this year I will be working with a grant from the Arcus Foundation that will be orchestrated through the Duke Islamic Studies Center on the concept of sexual identity and Islamic primary sources in order once again to be able to arrive at that place of peace and prosperity for all people. I'm under my time, which is unusual, and I think I'm going to give the rest of the time to the panel. Thank you. One of the things I remember from my father when I was young was that he used to say to me, I cannot go to the justice for you, you have to go for yourself. And when I became Muslim and I began working in the context of local Muslim communities, I thought that somehow I would gain some currency by adhering to all of the details about proper presentation and etiquette and adab, and my first task was to thoroughly learn Arabic so I could do my research in the Quran, and to always try to speak from the place where I thought the tape had already been running and that I was just on that trajectory. And then I learned that whenever you challenge the powers that be, whenever you challenge people's sense of privilege, which patriarchy is a sense of privilege, that no matter what it is that you dress it up with, they're going to be responding to the subtext. And the subtext is always this: my equality comes from Allah. I don't need you to give it to me because it's already mine. And once you say that in a context where people believe that you have to defer to them to get it, it doesn't matter how you dress it up. So now I am closer to my death than I am to my birth. And so another imperative has come into my life, and that is back at what my father asked me: what will I do when I go to the judgment? And whenever it is that I encounter an injustice, like my sister said, and then I walk past it, I no longer feel that I have the capacity to be able to justify that because it wasn't dressed the right way, it wasn't speaking the right way, it didn't eat the right amount, it didn't pray at a certain time. That the imperative of being able to address injustice is a part of what makes me human and a part about what I will be responsible for, and that responsibility is going to come upon me much sooner than my chances to be able to correct it might be. So I'm completely committed to looking at the larger picture, and that larger picture means how do we live on the planet with the dignity that we think we deserve, and the answer to that is always that we must give that dignity to the people that we encounter.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
Everybody has their capacity, and everybody has their possibilities of making contributions. And it just happened to be my calling that, my first serious position was in Malaysia in 1989. And, being part of the founding members of Sisters in Islam. And it took me to a whole nother level in terms of the relationship between my theoretical work and my theology and activism and politics, and how you actually change policy. But I learned exactly the benefits of being able to establish networks of people that communicate at multiple levels. And at the same time, from those people, I actually received what I would consider to be the more nurturing environment for me to be able to actually go forward with my strengths. If you actually think about, or if I actually explain to you the kind of work that I'm doing, I'm actually the only African American that has the level of notoriety that I have internationally on the issue of Islam and gender. The fact that my own African American community in particular does not seem to want to give me, the time of day with regard to certain things is not something that I bother with as much as I used to. In fact, I used to say to people in the international field, I'm just going to stop doing this. I really need to focus on my own community. And I used to say that, and I realized that what I have experienced in terms of being able to believe in the capacity of people to interact with each other, I did not experience here, primarily because actually the African American community is very Salafi. It's, very conservative, and I'm really very far on the left. Why would I want to force them to be someplace that they don't want to be? So I accept them for who they are, and, I pray, in congregation because I like to pray in congregation, and we're all equal before, the eyes of Allah. That works for me. But as far as being able to be effective with the small amount of resources that Allah is giving me, actually that effectiveness has come in a place where my closest friends are all international. And if there wasn't things like, Skype and WhatsApp and, the internet, then I would be isolated. And I accept that. Because when I am in the places where there is an impact, and I want to make this really clear in terms of it, Muslim personal status law is a lived reality for the majority of Muslim women in the world, not necessarily in the United States. We have what you might call the attitude, but we don't necessarily have the actual personal status law. But Muslim personal status law is constructed on a primary notion of women's inferiority to men. And what we have been doing is to show the links between that construct and the whole idea of patriarchal privilege, and to remove it from the divine. Now, I could not do that work by simply talking the talk that will get me through the streets. I understand that now. I actually had to challenge the systems that were put into place to such an extent that I could talk back to those people at that level. But I felt that disconnection. So what happened was, all the women that I work with, starting with Sisters in Islam Malaysia, they were like, I don't get it. So I learned to break it down, but I broke it down into the context of very specific issues and how we address certain things like the minimum age of marriage, right? If people tell you the Prophet Muhammad, upon him be peace, married Aisha and she was such and such an age, and they want to use that as a precedent to be able to establish a law, then the number of things I need to be able to put into place in order to be able to challenge that narrative requires me to be precise on the nature of the development of Islamic thought, but at the same time, not to just be regurgitating. In other words, I have to engage with it critically, then I have to look at the realities on the ground, and I have to be able to establish another way of looking at the same thing. So I am completely indebted to the women and men in my life who remind me of how to communicate it when I fail to do it sufficiently on my own, but also who step in and help to break it down, to help to make it accessible. And not only that, I'm terrible in terms of the whole institutional structure in every way, shape, or form. I've just been rebellious, since I was little. There's some people that I just won't even bother to talk to, and fortunately, there are other people who have a greater capacity to be able to do that kind of conversation. And when you liaise, when you network, that's when we really become powerful. This whole thing, it takes a village. Well, that's a continual reality that we have to address. And I am indebted to those people who could communicate these erudite ideas in a way that was going to be accessible, because I lacked the capacity to be able to do it. But if they understood it and they could, help to communicate it, it has enlightened me with the capacity of the work to actually reach larger audiences. But I cannot say that I'm the one that's always capable of being able to make it accessible. So I confess to, where my location is. I accept it with grace, because this is where, Allah has given me the opportunity to have some impact in the world. At the places where it's not possible, I'm still waiting for you, brother, to step up and have a workshop with me. And then when that's over, then, it'll get further. Inshallah.
Did you want to?